The morning began like any other. Light crept through the blinds in quiet ribbons, brushing against the kitchen tiles. I had planned nothing dramatic for the day, just a little order, a little peace. The kettle hummed its usual tune, and somewhere a bird decided it was already spring. I remember smiling at that thought, the sort of small smile that happens only when you believe the world is predictable. I had no reason to think otherwise. Yesterday I'd hired a cleaning lady to take care of the old house while I stayed with my son. She'd come recommended, honest, polite, careful. It felt like a sensible decision. When the phone rang, it startled me more than it should have. Something in its tone felt sharp, urgent, like a warning wrapped in metal. I almost let it ring out. But habit, old habit, made me answer. Her voice trembled the instant she spoke. "Ma'am, there's someone in your house." The sentence didn't belong in the morning light. For a heartbeat I thought I'd misheard her. Then the kettle screamed behind me and I knew I hadn't. I set the phone on speaker and turned off the flame. "Where are you?" I asked. "In the hallway," she whispered. "He's upstairs." I heard him walk. I felt my body lean forward though there was nowhere to go. "Stay where you are," I said. "Don't move." "I'm on my way." The drive back stretched longer than memory. Rain began to fall, tracing silver threads across the windshield. Each drop kept time with my pulse. I told myself it was nothing, that people imagine things in unfamiliar houses. But her fear had weight, it sat beside me in the passenger seat. Halfway down the county road, the phone rang again. Static, then her whisper, hoarse now, "I think he's upstairs." "Get outside," I told her. "Go to your car." "I can't find my keys." The line went dead. I pressed harder on the accelerator. Trees blurred. The world narrowed to rain and road. When I reached Maple Lane the storm softened, like it wanted to watch what happened next. The porch light was on. I never left it on. Pause 1S. For a moment I stayed in the car, listening. Nothing. Only the ticking of cooling metal. Keys in one hand, phone in the other, I walked to the door. The boards under my shoes answered with small sighs. Inside smelled of lemon polish and something faintly metallic. "Hello?" My voice didn't sound like mine. No reply. Then, somewhere above me, a door eased shut. I climbed the stairs slowly, every step its own argument between fear and duty. At the top landing, the hall stretched out, still, watching. The smell of lavender cleaner lingered, trying too hard to be pleasant. The first room, empty. Second, empty. The third, Robert's old study, waited half open. The cleaning lady's gloves lay folded on the desk beside her phone. Screen cracked. She was nowhere. A whisper of movement brushed the air behind me. I turned, nothing. Only the faint scent of aftershave I hadn't known in years. Then the front door downstairs slammed shut. Silence followed, thick as dust. The minutes that came next exist in fragments. My hand on the railing. The creak of a floorboard that shouldn't have creaked. The feeling, irrational yet undeniable, that the house itself held its breath. I forced my feet to move. Down the stairs, into the kitchen. The window curtains billowed inward, their edges damp with rain. Someone had opened the back door, then closed it again. On the counter sat a mug, mine, but filled halfway with cold coffee. I hadn't poured it. I called the cleaner's name once more. The sound came back to me hollow, unclaimed. I walked toward the small security monitor near the pantry. Four gray screens blinked awake, Front porch, living room, kitchen, hall. In the living room view, the leather chair moved slightly, as though weight had just left it. Then, a blur, a tall shadow crossing behind. I froze, watching the seconds crawl across the timestamp. The image cleared. Empty again. I replayed it twice. Same thing. A presence there, then gone, leaving only the suggestion of motion. My thumb hovered over the police dial button, but something inside me said wait. That same intuition that keeps you from waking a child too early or opening a door before you must. I stepped into the living room. Everything sat exactly where it belonged. Except the air, it felt rearranged. Rainlight spilled through the window, catching the dust in slow spirals. The chair faced the fireplace now, not the window. Someone had turned it. I knelt beside it. On the seat rested a single photograph in a tarnished frame, my family 20 years ago. I didn't remember leaving it there. The back carried new ink. I never left. The words pinned the room in silence. The handwriting looked familiar but older, a tremor running through each letter. I held it up to the light and felt the paper still damp, as if written only minutes before. My phone buzzed again, motion alert. Front door camera. I tapped the screen, a man entering earlier that morning. His movements were calm, careful, reverent. He paused to touch the wall where Robert's portrait hung. Then the feet ended. I whispered to the empty air, "Who are you?" The house didn't answer. It never does, not in words. But sometimes, if you listen past the quiet, you catch a feeling that sits between memory and echo. That feeling was everywhere now. Soft breath. For a long time I stayed there, staring at the photograph in my hands. Outside, rain moved across the street in thin silver ribbons. The words on the back of the picture felt like a whisper still caught in the paper. I never left. I set it down on the desk and turned slowly, letting the room breathe with me. Every shadow had edges I didn't remember. Every creak answered with one of its own. The clock ticked once, twice, then stopped, as if even it wanted to listen. I opened the drawers. Receipts. Pens. Nothing strange. Until the lowest one, a slip of envelope pressed against the wood, pale as dust. No postage, only my name written in careful, shaking letters. I sat, half afraid to open it. The paper crackled like old leaves. Inside, a brass key and a note. Antonia. If you still live here, know that the door I couldn't close is finally shut. The handwriting. I knew it. David's. My husband's brother. Memories slid in it afternoons on this same porch, two brothers arguing gently about fence repairs, about whose turn it was to bring Mother flowers. David's laugh had always been softer than Robert's, his patience longer. He'd faded quietly after Robert's funeral, lost somewhere between grief and forgetting. I thought he was gone. All this time. I looked again at the key. Tiny scratches marked its edge, like it had been used recently. The thought of him here, moving through these rooms, sent a shiver that wasn't fear exactly, something older. I lifted the envelope, searching for any clue. A faint smell of cedar. The attic. Robert's attic. The place I hadn't opened since he left me his silence. The narrow staircase waited behind the bookshelf at the end of the hall. When I turned the key, the lock yielded with the quiet relief of something remembered. Dust breathed out first, then the smell of wood and time. Each step sounded careful, deliberate, the wood answering like it knew my weight. At the top, One small bulb still worked, humming faintly against the rafters. Boxes lined the walls, labeled with years I didn't want to count. In the far corner, a trunk sat apart, painted dark green, edges chipped like bark. The brass key turned again, fitting perfectly. Inside, photographs, letters, and a bundle wrapped in wool. On top, another note in that same trembling hand, for when you're ready. My heart moved slower then, as though it understood something before my mind did. I unwrapped the bundle. A silver watch stopped at 3:17, a child's drawing of a house, and beneath it a cassette labeled Home. Robert's old cassette deck still sat in his desk downstairs. I carried the bundle like it could break, each stair groaning softly underfoot. The tape clicked in. Static, then a man's voice, folder, fragile, real. Antonia, it's David. If you're hearing this, I must have wandered again. His breathing filled the small room. I could almost see his shoulders rise and fall. I come back here sometimes, thinking Robert will be in his chair, that we'll talk like we used to. But he isn't, and neither am I. I pressed my hand to my mouth. That tremor in his tone, the sound of a man aware he's slipping through memory. I didn't mean to frighten anyone, he continued. I just needed to see the room one more time. Tell him I found the letter he left me, that I understand now. The recording ended in a hush of static. And in that silence, the whole story rearranged itself. The cleaning lady hadn't met a stranger in my house. She'd met a man who didn't know where time had placed him. I sat for a while, the cassette still warm under my fingertips. Then I whispered into the quiet, "It's all right, David. You can rest now." The window curtain moved with a sigh of wind, as if the house exhaled with me. I stayed in the study until dusk began to color the windows. The light changed slowly, a thin gold that made dust drift like tiny planets. Somewhere outside, a wind chime gave one uncertain note. I replayed the cassette twice more, hoping a different meaning might appear between the words. But the truth never hides in the noise, it waits in the quiet that follows. David had come here not as a trespasser, but as a pilgrim. He wasn't haunting me, he was remembering himself. Every small detail, the mug of cold coffee, the chair turned toward the fire, had been his way of visiting an old conversation. I closed the player, my fingers resting on the stop button a heartbeat longer than necessary. There was one more question pressing against the back of my thoughts. What door had he meant in that letter? What had he finally closed? The answer, I suspected, waited somewhere in the house. I walked the hall again, slow, deliberate. Each photograph on the wall looked almost alive, their faces turning warm in the setting sun. When I reached the front porch, I saw it, the small shed at the far end of the garden, its doors slightly open. Robert's old workshop. I hadn't entered since the day he passed. I stepped outside. The air carried that after-rain smell of soil and pine. The grass bent gently under my shoes. Inside the shed, afternoon light pushed through the slats like thin fingers. The workbench still held Robert's tools, laid out as he'd left them. And there, nailed above the bench, hung a single wooden plaque. On it, 2 names, carved by hand, Robert and David Brooks. Quiet exhale. A small metal latch held the plaque closed like a lid. When I lifted it, another envelope slipped out, brittle with time. To Antonia. When the 2 of us are gone, promise me you'll keep this house filled with kindness. That's all it ever needed. Beneath the letter lay a photo of the brothers as boys, their smiles uneven, their arms thrown around each other. I realized then what David had meant by closing a door. It wasn't about the house, it was about his guilt. He'd carried the unfinished grief of leaving his brother that day, and he'd come back to forgive himself. I sat on the step outside the shed, the letter trembling lightly in my hand. The world smelled clean again. For the first time in years, I felt the weight in the air shift from sorrow to peace. I whispered, "You found your way home, David." The wind moved through the garden in answer, lifting the edge of my scarf. I let it take what it needed. When I turned back toward the house, the porch light flicked on by itself, just the motion sensor, maybe, or maybe memory saying thank you. I smiled. Small, tired, but real. Sometimes the ghosts we fear are only the pieces of love we forgot to finish. Twilight softened the edges of everything. The air between the trees shimmered with that quiet light that lives only for a few minutes each day. I stood at the garden's edge, looking back at the house that had held so many versions of us. It no longer felt like a place that needed guarding. It felt listened to. The porch bulb hummed above the door, a halo too bright for dusk. Inside, shadows folded into one another as if the house were exhaling. I carried David's letter upstairs and laid it beside the photograph on Robert's desk. The two brothers, side by side again, at last. For a while I simply sat. The silence around me wasn't empty, it was full of small, invisible things, breathing, memory, the heartbeat of wood. If you live long enough, you learn that silence has texture. It can scratch, or it can soothe. Tonight, it soothed. I walked through the rooms slowly, turning off lights, touching doorframes, whispering thanks without words. In the hallway I stopped before the mirror that had always shown me more age than I expected. For the first time I didn't mind. Every line on my face belonged to someone I'd loved. To remove them would be to erase the proof that I had stayed. I laughed then, softly, surprised by the sound of it. It felt like the first real laugh the house had heard in years. Downstairs, I found the cleaning lady's gloves folded neatly where she had left them. Tomorrow I would call her, explain what happened, and promise her a calmer job next time. But tonight I wanted her fear to rest too. We all deserved rest. I poured another cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the street lamps bloom one by one. Each light reminded me of a voice, a life, a story still unfolding somewhere beyond these walls. That thought was comfort. Sometimes I think homes choose their keepers. They find the ones who will listen to their creaks and sighs, who will patch their wounds and forgive their noises. Maybe that's why this house never let me go. It needed someone who would hear the difference between loneliness and memory. And maybe that's what I've been learning all along. That love doesn't always speak. Sometimes it waits quietly, like dust in sunlight, until you finally notice it dancing. I turned off the lamp. The dark settled easily, friendly now. The wind outside moved through the maples, whispering secrets too gentle to frighten. I closed my eyes and listened. The sound was neither storm nor silence. It was life continuing, fainter, slower, but still there. Thank you, I whispered, to the house, to the night, to whoever might still be listening. The house slept easily that night. Every hinge, every stair, seemed to settle into place, as if they'd been waiting for this calm. I woke before dawn, drawn by the faint blue promise of morning. Steam rose from my cup while the first bird called from somewhere unseen. That small, fearless sound reminded me that ordinary moments often save us when grand ones cannot. I walked the hallway again. Each framed photograph caught the weak light in a different way, faces warming as the sun climbed higher. Robert in his garden hat. David holding the fishing pole too big for his hands. Both smiling at something forever just outside the frame. For years I'd kept those pictures dusted but untouched. Now I understood that memories need to be handled, not preserved in glass. They are meant to breathe with us. I opened the front door. Cool air carried the smell of wet earth and lilac. The street was still, the world between sleep and motion. I thought of the people beginning their own mornings, each believing today would be ordinary. Maybe that's the grace of living, we never see the lessons coming. The porch boards creaked under my weight, an old song I knew by heart. I whispered to the empty yard, "You can rest now, both of you." Back inside, I gathered the scattered letters, tied them with the same wool scarf David had used. I slid them into the drawer beneath the desk. Not hidden, just home. The brass key still waited on the mantel. I traced its edge with my thumb before placing it in the little bowl where Robert used to drop his change. Keys, like memories, are only heavy when we keep them in our hands too long. Mid-morning sunlight touched the floorboards. In it, dust motes drifted slow and golden, tiny universes turning without hurry. I realized that peace doesn't arrive as silence, it comes disguised as ordinary life. All the fear, all the noise, had only been part of the house remembering who it belonged to. And me. I'd been part of that remembering too. When the phone rang later, it was the cleaning lady. Her voice steadier now. She asked if everything was all right. I told her the truth, or at least the part she needed. It was someone who needed to say goodbye. Silence on the line, then a soft, "I'm glad he found you. We promised to see each other next week." After we hung up, I realized I was smiling again. Not at relief, but at how kindness travels quietly between strangers. I sat by the window until the light shifted to noon. The world outside had already moved on, children walking to school, a dog chasing its own shadow, a mail carrier whistling. Life never pauses for our stories, it carries them, folds them into its rhythm. Maybe that's the lesson David left me. When we can't close a door, life does it gently for us. And if we listen carefully, the sound it makes is not an ending, it's forgiveness. Evening came again, softer this time. The sun settled behind the maples, and the light turned the whole house the color of memory. I lit one lamp, nothing more, and watched the walls grow warm. The quiet didn't feel empty now, it felt full. Every creak, every hum, belonged to something alive. For the first time in years, I understood what it meant for a home to breathe. I poured a small cup of tea, not because I needed it but because rituals deserve respect. The steam rose in slow curls, and I thought of all the mornings when Robert and I had sat in this same chair talking about nothing that mattered and everything that did. How ordinary moments become the anchors that hold us when the extraordinary arrives. On the desk lay the photograph of the brothers, side by side. I touched the edge once, careful not to smudge the ink. Then I whispered, "You're both home now." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, scattering the last of the rain. A single leaf clung to the window, gold against the glass, before sliding away. Everything leaves eventually. It's what makes staying matter. The phone buzzed again, my son checking in. He asked if I was okay. I said, "Better than okay." He laughed, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Maybe one day I'll tell him this story, or maybe I'll let the house keep it. Because some stories aren't warnings, they're invitations to listen, to forgive, to love again. Night gathered slowly. I closed the curtains, left one window open just enough for the breeze. The air smelled like rain and tea and fresh beginnings. I sat in Robert's chair, the same one that once rocked by itself in the dark, and it felt lighter now under me. If you ever find yourself afraid of a quiet room, remember this. Fear is only memory asking to be heard. Sit with it. Listen to it. It will tell you what it needs. And when it finishes, breathe out, and thank it for leaving. That's how we make peace with the living and the gone. I turned off the lamp. The house exhaled once more. The faint glow from the street slipped across the floor like a blessing. Until next time, I whispered, with love. Grandmay.